Although Bloodborne's opening scenes take place within the darkened halls of Yosefka's clinic, it seems as though the game doesn't truly begin until we open the gates and step onto the streets of central Yharnam. It's here, amid the distinctive Georgian architecture, the brick streets, and the medley of antique carriages and caskets, that we grasp one of the most fundamental and important details of the early game. We're wandering through a Gothic storyscape, as if we had emerged into an otherworldly version of a great British metropolis of the Victorian Age. For years, players have made the default assumption that Yharnam is a horrific depiction of 1800s London. But as I've said and shown throughout this series, and as we'll certainly see today, Yharnam is a distorted version of the Scottish capital Edinburgh. The clues are there, we just haven't dug them up yet. To see the influence of Edinburgh on the main city of Bloodborne, we have to examine Yharnam in its entirety. As we come to observe in the game, the various sections of Yharnam, in a sense, serve as snapshots in time, providing a sort of chronicling of the city's history. To start this episode, we have to go back to the beginning, to the streets of Old Yharnam. As I mentioned in part 3 of this series when discussing the similarity of ashen blood and the real-life sickness cholera, Old Yharnam in the original Japanese is called the Old Town District. We can thank the lore hunter Last Protagonist again for his work on Japanese retranslations. This is a pivotal clue in connecting Yharnam and Edinburgh. The oldest part of the city of Edinburgh is what is known as Old Town. This isn't some little-known nickname. It's the name of the biggest tourist hub in all of Edinburgh. The virtually identical naming between Edinburgh's Old Town and Yharnam's Old Town District help us to establish a possible association. But that's just the start. Let's dig deeper. Although Edinburgh's Old Town was likely first inhabited as early as the 7th century AD, the area didn't really begin to grow into a thriving commercial and cultural center until the 15th century. As I noted in part 3, conditions in Old Town in the 17 and 1800s were unhealthy at best. Thanks to the massive Flodden Wall that lined the city's exterior, there was little room to expand housing as the city's population swelled in the 18th and 19th centuries. It resulted in a densely packed urban space in which crime and disease were rampant. And just like we see in Old Yharnam, in which plague and fire forced the abandonment of the old city, Edinburgh's Old Town saw a similar exodus as the result of infernos and infectious disease. In the early 1800s, Edinburgh was beset by a series of epidemics, including outbreaks of cholera in 1832 and again in 1840. These cholera outbreaks came on the heels of decades of ravaging typhus and bubonic plague. It was the same time period, though, the early 1800s, that witnessed a rash of conflagrations, including the Great Fire of Edinburgh, which devastated the city in 1824. The fire raged for 5 days, burning dozens of tenement buildings, several shops and businesses, and the steeple of the Tronkirk Principal Parish Church. More than 400 homes were destroyed. Much like Old Yharnam was abandoned following the Ashen Blood Sickness, the Scourge of Beasts, and a district-wide fire, the combination of rampant disease and devastating fires forced Edinburgh's leaders to embark upon a massive expansion of the city beyond its old Flodden Wall, leading to the formation of the district known as Newtown, further to the north. Edinburgh's Old Town was slowly abandoned by all but the poorest of Scots in favor of the new, more lavish enclaves of Newtown, just like in Bloodborne, when residents turned their backs on the diseased beasts of Old Yharnam and retreated to the more modern confines of Central Yharnam. Whereas Central Yharnam and Cathedral Ward are home to a good many landmarks whose official titles or informal names appear in item descriptions, dialogue, or lore notes, Old Yharnam, to the best of my knowledge, contains only one such structure. It's the Church of the Good Chalice. The church is the final destination in Old Yharnam, and serves as the arena for the boss fight with the blood-starved beast. Gehrman tells us to go there to seek a holy chalice. In two pieces of dialogue, Gehrman specifies that the chalice can be found in the valley, or the valley hamlet, indicating that Old Yarnum lies at the foot of hills or a mountain. Keep this in mind because we'll return to it momentarily. Because Gehrman tells us several times that we should venture to this church within Old Yarnum, we're essentially being told that this location is one we're supposed to prioritize and see as valuable. I don't think this is a coincidence. While Edinburgh's Old Town is home to numerous historic landmarks and tourist destinations, the most famous attraction of the area is the Holyrood Palace and its attached Holyrood Abbey Church, which trace their origins to the 1100s. When we place images side by side of the Church of the Good Chalice and the ruins of the Holyrood Abbey Church, it's easy to see the astounding similarities. Both churches are missing their roofs. The outer walls of both abbeys contain intricate stonework designs that once served as window frames but are now missing their stained glass. But that's not all. Just like the Church of the Good Chalice serves as a dead end at the bottom of Old Yarnum, Holyrood Abbey serves as the end point of Edinburgh's Old Town, where its main thoroughfare, the road known as Canongate, dead ends. Moreover, Edinburgh's Old Town lies within a valley, just like Old Yarnum is the valley hamlet, as Gehrman told us. Old Town is located along the edge of the Salisbury Crags, an ancient rocky outcropping that serves as the southern edge of the city of Edinburgh. The Church of the Good Chalice is our key architectural clue to help us see that Old Yarnum is a parallel for Old Town. These historical, architectural, and geographical details are exceptionally persuasive. With these clues from Old Yarnum in our portfolio, we can turn our attention to Central Yarnum. For this section, it's important to take a bird's eye view of the city. We can't really apply cardinal directions to Bloodborne because the sun and moon are arbitrarily positioned, and as you might have seen other lore hunters point out, these astral bodies don't adhere to any rules. They're all over the sky. Nevertheless, for this exercise, let's assume that Central Yarnum, as we see here, is arranged west to east as we look left to right on this map. On its northern half, the Great Bridge stretches across a large, empty expanse before connecting to the other side of the city by the Gate of Cathedral Ward. The Great Bridge's southern portion, by contrast, is contained within the residential area of Central Yarnum. As we move southward, we see buildings immediately adjacent to the bridge on our right and left sides. This is exactly like what we see in Edinburgh. Although they're named separately, Edinburgh's North Bridge and South Bridge are the same roadway running north and south in the central part of the city. Much like Yarnum's Great Bridge crosses over an expanse on its north side, the North Bridge of Edinburgh was built across a valley and former man-made lake known as Norloch, or the North Lake. As you move southward on the roadway and go beyond High Street, you find yourself on the South Bridge, which is lined on its sides with buildings. The arches of the bridge are almost entirely underneath the surface, having been closed off and built around over the span of nearly 200 years. But one archway remains above ground, which can be found along the road known as Cowgate. It's situated within residential buildings and businesses on its sides. We observe a similar phenomenon in Central Yarnum. On the south side of the Great Bridge, a large archway can be found within the residential area of Central Yarnum, where we find a large group of huntsmen by the burning corpse of a scourge beast. The archway contains a door, which helps to slightly mask the similarity of Yarnum's Great Bridge and Edinburgh's South Bridge. One last note about architectural similarities. I would be remiss to not point out that Edinburgh, like Yarnum, contains an aqueduct. The Slateford Aqueduct on the southwest edge of Edinburgh carries water on its raised platform from the river called the Water of Leith to the Union Canal, a man-made waterway that runs into the heart of the city. Yarnum's aqueduct funnels water to the sewers, as well as the canal that leads to the dry dock of Central Yarnum. I haven't been able to observe any other major visual or historical connections involving the aqueduct, so I'll just leave it at that. The streets of central Yarnum and the lowest parts of Cathedral Ward are littered with carriages, caskets, and gravestones. The headstones are clustered in unusual places, such as brick walkways and outside of residential doors. While this strange feature is likely intended to make us question the reality of the game, as if this could only happen within a nightmare, I think they're also meant to depict the overcrowding, disease, and mass death of the Victorian city. London, Edinburgh, and other major metro areas of Great Britain in the Victorian age were overcrowded to an unimaginable degree. Authors and artists of the period described and illustrated the swarms of humanity flooding city streets and the ramshackle homes stacked on top of one another with one room occupied by as many as 15 people. Gustave Doré, perhaps better than any other artist of the period, captured the claustrophobic density of human life. Disease, mainly cholera, typhus, and tuberculosis, were merciless killers. Cemeteries were quite literally overflowing with bodies in the major cities, forcing governments to establish state-run burial grounds. In London, city administrators closed all cemeteries within the city limits in the 1850s because there was no room for the seemingly never-ending arrival of corpses. The carriages and horse-drawn carts that we find in Yarnum, of course, help us to assign a timestamp of sorts to Bloodborne. It's an overt signal that the game is depicting the Victorian era. But these carts and wagons are also a reference to the Victorian period's unimaginable loss of life. As the Bishop of London wrote to the Home Secretary of England in 1855, the corpses of children were frequently carried to the places of sepulture in cabs, meaning horse-drawn carriages, and that it was no uncommon sight to see a string of such vehicles filled with dead bodies waiting at the gate of an unconsecrated burial ground until they could be admitted. The cabs we see in central Yarnum, from the back alleys to the Great Bridge, seem to draw from this history. If you recall from the second episode of this series, we observed how the work of English artist Richard Tennant Cooper and his painting Chloroform shaped the opening cutscene of the game. It appears that From Software may have drawn from several of his other pieces in designing several aspects of Yarnum. We see these parallels in his painting titled Representing Cholera. In this image, we see piles of corpses, which are a common sight in Bloodborne, sometimes represented literally, other times represented by endless piles of headstones and caskets. But we also see a dark, disfigured man whose torso appears to be emerging from a black, oily pool on the ground, his arms outstretched. This seems reminiscent of the rotted corpse enemies we encounter in the sewers of central Yarnum. I think Cooper's painting titled Representing Bubonic Plague also might have played a role in one other area, although it's not within central Yarnum. Cooper described this painting as a giant hand roaming through the dark streets of London, people and rats trying to escape its grasp. This giant unseen hand that emerges from the dark and inflicts harm upon the poor souls of the city seems somewhat similar to what the amygdala enemy does to the player in Cathedral Ward, especially before we have enough insight to see the creature on the side of Eden Chapel. A hand reaches down from out of nowhere and snatches the unsuspecting player. Cooper's painting and the snatching move of the amygdala might be completely unrelated, but because we know that Cooper's work was used elsewhere, it seems plausible here. In the next episode, we'll take a look at Canehurst Castle. Although this area remains a mystery in many ways, there are some lore discoveries here that will absolutely blow your mind.